Welcome to the show, everybody. Seth Kamens, who is not here, and I'm Sean Palmer, and I am. Seth is off this evening due to, well, it's baseball season. And Seth is not the biggest of baseball fans, but you know what? That's okay. He brings other things to the table. Today, we are going to go through our fantasy baseball. Wow. Different sport, different time. Fantasy baseball preview. And then next week, we'll have our baseball preview. I believe it is next week. Baseball is starting out here at the Seth and Sean Sports Radio Show. And I got to tell you, before we get to that, there are things that I have not liked about baseball in the last couple of years. I mean, anybody that has watched or listened to our show over the last 2 years knows that I have been, for lack of a better term, disgusted with how baseball has done a disservice to its fans. No question about it. Everything about the last year and a half, maybe even the last 5 years, has been a complete disservice to the fans. Starting with labor acrimony, changing of the rules. And I get that these rule changes, such as putting a guy on second base to start the extra innings or shortening the games to 7 innings on a doubleheader, were done for a very distinct reason. I get that. I completely understand that was done for that reason. But nobody asked the fans. And that to me is bothersome. And it's bothersome because we're the ones, myself included, are the ones that watch the games. We're the ones that go to the games when you can go to games. And I feel like we are being left out of the process. Yeah, it's just that simple. And none of the rule changes, none of them, are ones that I would have agreed with. And that's not to say that I'm always right. Because last year, as we saw with the universal DH, it did make the game a lot more exciting. I won't deny that. It absolutely made the game more exciting. But that being said, I'm supposed to have one of these little banners going back and forth. So here we go. So that's not to be said that, and I should have, I don't know, a back sports page thing going on. And I'm trying to find that. And by the way, this is brought to you by Back Sports Page. Randy Zelia has done a tremendous job here at Back Sports Page, at StreamYard, getting us all together. And I'm Sean Palmer, and I'm sorry. You can follow me before we start this. You can follow me online at SULawyer2001. It says it right there in the box. You can find us on Seth and Sean Sports Radio, both on Twitter and on Facebook. And Seth Kamens, you can find at S. Kamens on Twitter as well. So that gets out the normal spiel. And now we can get back to my ranting and raving, which you all tuned in to hear. The universal DH is something I don't like. I enjoy seeing a pitcher bat. I enjoy the strategy that goes along with it. And there are not many people, I understand, there are definitely not a lot of people that agree with me. Okay, you don't have to. You think that it's going to be a better game having an extra batter there. Well, for my Mets, my New York Mets, I think it's this way, it would be better for us because Dominic Smith would be able to play first base, Pete Alonso would play DH, and we'd have an extra bat in the lineup, and our fielding would be tremendously better. And I say our, it's not really our. My brother makes fun of me all the time for saying our. It's not really our team. It's them, and we pay salaries. So while I do own a whole lot of merchandise, it's not really my team as much as it is anybody else's team. We have Fandom. Fandom is short for Fanatic. And those that have followed the show know that I am a fan of all New York sports teams and the Syracuse Orange, who play tomorrow. And we'll talk a little bit more about, actually, next week will probably be the NCAA preview. And then the week after will be the baseball preview. But I do digress. Baseball has certainly taken a back seat to these other sports, and most of it is because of the acrimony that goes along with it. Nobody wants to hear about labor problems. They just don't. I mean, I'm one of the few people that cares about a salary cap or a luxury tax or a hard cap or a soft cap, depending on what sport you're in, and how all the mechanisms work with regards to how salaries can interchange and how basketball trades can be made and how football cuts can be made and what the franchise player means. Who was franchised today, like Dak Prescott with a 4-year, $160 million contract, how much dead money that means on the cap for Ben Roethlisberger. All those things are important to me because I care. But for the Joe normal person out there, they couldn't give a rat's ass about it. They want to see games on the field. I don't blame them because I want to see games on the field too. And baseball has completely disenfranchised its fans with this bullshit, and I'll say that again, bullshit of labor acrimony. Nothing can be done without an argument. And this is coming from me, who loves to argue, but you have to, as my boss says all the time, see the forest from the trees. And baseball is losing the battle with the forest because the forest is growing bigger. Esports, Netflix, Disney Plus, there are a whole lot of different options in which can take your time, even if movies aren't one of them. Baseball should have been the beneficiary of COVID, if that's even possible. People are sitting on their ass watching television all last summer. They're sitting on their ass watching television all this spring or going into the spring, waiting for something to happen. And last year, baseball screwed the pooch. It's just that simple. They had the chance. We spoke about it last June. They had the chance to be the first team, the first sport out there, the sport that had less COVID problems or potential COVID problems, because baseball, you don't need to be in a bubble. You're not backing down anybody. You're not going nose to nose with them. You're standing on first base, somebody else standing on second, somebody else standing on third, and you got a shortstop. Nobody within 6 feet of each other for the majority of the game. And yet, baseball, it's funny because I'm hearing in the back of my head the James Earl Jones, baseball has passed the time. Well, baseball may have had it passed by with last year. I don't know about anybody else, but to me, if Steve Cohen had not bought the Mets, I probably would not be watching baseball this year either. He brought some excitement back, and we'll get into that in a couple of weeks when we go through our baseball preview. But without him buying the Mets and myself and many, many other baseball Mets fans in particular having to go back to the Wilpons, well, that's not always the greatest of situations. It never was, and it never will be. So here we are, again, talking baseball and fantasy baseball. I partake in 2 leagues, and there are 2 types of leagues for those that of the uninitiated watching this stream. There are head-to-head leagues, and then there are rotisserie leagues. And let me explain the difference. A head-to-head league puts your players against another person's players. Much like fantasy football, you play for a week, not for a day, a week. And then the winner takes 1-0. And then you stack your wins, much like fantasy football. Then you have rotisserie leagues. Rotisserie leagues are the long, if you can say that head-to-head are the short game, a week, rotisserie are the long game, which means you are counting stats throughout the entire season. And you may have, let's say, 10 teams in your league. You're going to have 10 different statistical categories. Generally, they're home run. If you're 5x5, home runs, batting average, RBIs, runs, and stolen bases. 5. For pitching, you have wins, whip, which is walks, hits versus innings pitched, strikeouts, saves, and ERA. 5. Those are generally the 5x5 leagues. And you get your numbers will deal with accumulate over time. And you'll get a 1 through 10 in each spot. And at the end of the year, you realize if you have the most categories, the most points, right? 1 through 10 in each of those 10 categories. I am not a fan of rotisserie leagues. And the reason is you can drop behind you could be out of it by the end of month 1, potentially. It's not hard to do that. There are certain categories which are much easier to make up. And then there are difficult categories, like the categories in which you have rankings, divisions. So like ERA, which is percentages, ERA, batting average, whip. Those are very difficult if you go down to make up, because as you are accumulating statistics, so is everybody else. And another bad game could put you even further behind. In the counting statistics, there are just certain counting statistics, most notably saves and steals, that are very limited in nature. So you're going to have maybe, 15, 20 people that are going to accumulate most of the steals in Major League Baseball for the year. And then you're going to have 10 to 20 guys that accumulate most of the saves in baseball for the year. And that's it. So if you don't get 1 or 2 of those 20 guys, it's not a matter of getting 10 guys that get 5 steals. You're going to have to get that doesn't counteract the one guy that gets 50. So it's a drafting, and steals and saves are not exactly the easiest statistics to put forth. You don't know who's going to get them. You do have some guys that you're kind of confident that they're going to have some steals. Eloy Jimenez will have some steals. Bo Bichette will have some steals. Luis Robert, Ozzy Abeles will have some steals. Trey Turner. So Trey Turner is ranked in ESPN's top 300 for head-to-head categories. He is the shortstop for the Washington Nationals, and he is ranked 7th overall. Ronald Acuna Jr. is ranked 2nd overall, and Mookie Betts is ranked 1st overall, above Mike Trout and above Juan Soto and above Jacob deGrom. And the reasoning, and Cody Bellinger is ranked 12th. And the reason these 4 or 5 guys are ranked so high is because they get those stats. They get those steals. And steals are ridiculously hard to come by, as I said before. And the first reliever in the top 300, if I'm going down and down and down, it should be in like this. Here we go. Aroldis Chapman is number 73. Is there Josh Hader is 57. Is there anybody above Hader? So Hader's an interesting Hader from Milwaukee. Hader is used in a lot of different situations in which he pitches multiple innings. So he gets those multiple strikeouts. And that's the reason why he is 57th. And Aroldis Chapman is 73rd, because Chapman doesn't generally pitch more than 1 inning at a time. Liam Hendricks for the White Sox is 62. So that's really the reason why I like head-to-head. Head-to-head is a much better situation for me. It is a much better situation for you. You can screw up a week and just play the next week, and that's okay. You can have the worst week in baseball and come up the next week and be just fine. The other thing is, when it comes to trading is a lot easier in head-to-head than it is ever in rotisserie. People just do not want to trade in rotisserie. And they fall into a belief that their players are so much better than somebody else's players. And that happens too. If you're listening, by the way, and you want to get on, you can certainly click on the link, and we welcome visitors and other hosts. If you'd like to host with me one week, that would be great. So moving on. So if we're looking at starting pitching, now starting pitching, I have routinely done nothing with. And to tell you the truth, I haven't won a fantasy baseball league in a long time. So maybe that is the wrong strategy. I generally skimp on starting pitching and go for those players that have multi-positional playing. Because when you deal with a weekly league head-to-head, so rotisserie leagues generally have a maximum amount of games per position. Head-to-head does not. So when you're in those counting stats, you want as many players playing every single day. So if you have a guy, and I'll bring up who plays multi-positions these days. So let's look at Whit Merrifield. Whit Merrifield, who is a Kansas City Royal, I believe for fantasy league purposes, is a second baseman and a third baseman. I'm looking this up right now, or did he just play second last year? Last year he played. He had register fielding 2020. He played right field. He played 30 games. He played outfield 51 games. Center field 23 games. I'm looking for the infield. Infield, he played second base 15 games. So depending on your rules, 15 games may be enough to get him second base eligibility. So he has second base and out. Whit Merrifield is an important player in fantasy for just that reason. And that's the way I like to play. Cody Bellinger, I believe, gets you both outfield and first base. Last year he played 19 games at first base and 78 games in the outfield. So he should be able to get you that type of deal. 39 games in the outfield, 19 games at first base. So he's definitely infield and outfield eligible, which is why he is second in the first baseman category and also sixth in the outfield category. And Bellinger steals bases. So he's one of those guys that you want to target. So if you're looking in a head-to-head league, I would seriously suggest getting guys like that, or DJ LeMahieu, who I believe also gets multi-positional eligibility this year. Looking at his stats, hold on a second. Standard fielding, he was 11 games at third, 11 games at first, 37 games at second. This is a positional amazement if you are based on 10 games. And last year, considering that there were only about 70 games played, that makes sense. So guys like that, I would definitely target for positional ability. And Dominic Smith, who plays both first base and outfield, going through the first baseman. Max Muncy, I believe, gets both outfield and infield eligibility. Bryce Hopkins, I believe, gets both outfield and infield eligibility. And I believe that's it. The one thing you don't want to do, at least I have found this to be a good strategy, and I am pushing this on you guys as well. Do not draft a DH. Do not. So every single league that I have been in has a utility player. And that utility player could be any player that obviously is in your lineup. Except when you have a DH. So guys like Nelson Cruz or someone along the lines of Yordan Alvarez or JD Martinez or Giancarlo Stanton. All of those guys, I do not believe, have eligibility for the outfield this year. And they are going to be saddled in your DH spot for the entire year. So you lose that flexibility that I was saying earlier, that you don't have positional flexibility. And that is extremely important when it comes to head-to-head weeks. And in one of the leagues I play in is only offense. So that certainly helps with positional flexibility. So if you're looking for guys that, from my point of view, and we're going to go about a half hour today, looking for those guys that may pick it up a notch, maybe a little bit more valuable than they were last year, here is my cheat sheet. So generally you look at, especially if there is no DH in the National League, you look at guys that go from the American League to the National League. And the reasoning for that is it's one less player that you have, one less hit batter that you have to pitch to. You're pitching to a pitcher every 9 guys. And I know this goes to, we want the universal DH, and right now there isn't one. But let's look at guys that went from the American League to the National League in this past year. So you have a guy like Carlos Carrasco for the Mets. He's not going to pitch against the number ones because that's Jacob deGrom. He's not going to pitch against the number twos because that's Marcus Stroman. He's going to pitch against the number threes. And he had I think it's around a 4 ERA last year. I would be very surprised if it wasn't down in the 3.5 or 3.2 range this year. Another guy, Blake Snell, the former Cy Young Award winner, is going from Tampa Bay to San Diego and going from a good defense to a really good defense in San Diego in a pitcher's park. So Blake Snell, right, ESPN has him as the 18th pitcher and 76th player overall. No, I'm putting him up in the top 10 for pitchers. I really like Blake Snell this year. Other players that would be on my list, Chris Paddock, who is coming back from injury in San Diego. Zach Plesac, who is basically replacing Carlos Carrasco. He's going to be the number 2 behind Shane Bieber. I think he's the number 2. Yeah, he's the number 2 behind Shane Bieber. And if he didn't violate COVID protocols last year, he would have been a top 10 pitcher. Don't sit on Shohei Ohtani, and both as a hitter and a pitcher. Now, as a hitter, you know you're getting a DH, right? So he's going to sit there. But if you can, in some leagues, he's both counted for positional availability as a pitcher and a hitter. And that is an amazing combination for you to get. So look for him. Looking at the first baseman, first of all, let's go to the relief pitchers. I'd shy away from Edwin Diaz of the Mets. I think the Mets are going to have a great year. I really do. But relief pitchers are so up and down. I'd shy away from him. I would go with Trevor Rosenthal, who is now closing in Oakland. Oakland seems to always be able to rehab and throw out a good staff. And being to that stadium, I can understand why pitchers love it. There is a ton of infield and outfield ground. I would definitely look to him. Brad Hand is now closing in Washington, or will be, and that's an interesting mix. Guys to stay away from, like I said before, I would stay away from Edwin Diaz. If you're looking at the top guys, I'd stay away from Kirby Yates for the same reason that I say American League pitchers to National League do better. National League to American League pitchers, not so much. And he is going from the AL West to the NL West to the AL East. Now pitching in Toronto after that injury, I'd shy away from him as well. Craig Kimbrell, it's got the name, but the Cubs are not going to be very good. So I would stay away from him. Okay, moving over to first baseman. You know I like Bellinger. Freddie Freeman is my guy. Every single year I seem to have Freddie Freeman, and every single year he produces. So I'll stay with Freddie Freeman as a guy that you want. Look at Vlad Guerrero Jr., depending on where you can get him. ESPN has him ranked 6th overall for first baseman. I think he might go a little bit lower as a comeback player. I'd look at him. And Miguel Sano from Minnesota, if you can survive the bad batting average, he always puts the rock over the wall. So I would totally go with him. Second baseman, I've already talked about LeMahieu and Merrifield and Ketel Marte as well. Ketel Marte from Arizona, I don't believe gets that eligibility. He played mostly shortstop last year. No, he 41 games at second base, didn't play enough in the outfield, so he loses that eligibility this year. If you're looking for a guy that's on the lower end of the spectrum, maybe in the top 10 to 12, I would look at Jeff McNeil. He's finally going to play second base for the Mets for the entire year. He's a guy to latch onto. I really believe he's going to have one of those years. Looking at the shortstops, you got Fernando Tatis Jr., who's going to be a MVP candidate, and Trey Turner, who we already talked about. Shortstop is surprisingly deep this year. You can go 12 deep. The number 12 player on the ESPN board is Carlos Correa, who a couple of years ago would have been top 5. I really like Correa, so I wouldn't have any problem waiting 10 or 11 picks for those types of players. If you're looking at Tatis, Turner, Trevor Story, Francisco Lindor, Xander Bogaerts, Corey Seager, Bo Bichette, Tim Anderson, Gleyber Torres, or Javier Baez, or Carlos Correa, if you can get one of those, why are you spending the money or the pick on a shortstop? I would wait. Third baseman, it's a little bit smaller. Again, LeMahieu gets some eligibility here. So again, if you're looking to stock up, second baseman is light, third base is light. Second baseman is probably 6 or 7 deep. Third base is probably 8 or 9 deep before you're going into the Kevin Biggio's, who also gets double eligibility with second base. Chris Bryant, you hope comes back, but you're not really sure. Justin Turner, Josh Donaldson, lots of names there, but not a lot of productivity. So you might want to look at the Ramirez, Machado, or Rendon. And I love Rendon. Rendon's one of my guys that I like to get every year. And when you go to outfield, well, you got the Betts, Acuna, Soto, Trout, Yelich, Bellinger, Harper, Tier. And then you have Starling, Marte, Jimenez, Merrifield. And again, here's Merrifield. So Merrifield has second base, as we said before, second base and outfield eligibility, which is a huge deal. You can go for some of those younger guys. Michael Conforto is in a contract year. He's 17th on ESPN's list. Dominic Smith is 20th, whether he gets enough playing time. Does Aaron Judge come back? Jeff McNeil also here. So remember, Jeff McNeil, we just talked about as a second baseman, also gets outfield eligibility. So second base outfield is Merrifield and McNeil. And did I say no? Biggio goes to third base. So those two guys you may want to look at for that double eligibility. And I know I keep saying it, but it's pretty important. Eligibility when it comes to these types of things is really important. So I would definitely look towards that type of deal. If you're looking at the catchers, it's one catcher. It's JT Realmuto. Everybody else is in second place. So you got Will Smith, Salvador Perez, Yasmani Grandal, Wilson Contreras. That's probably tier 2. And then tier 3 is everybody else. So if you're not going to get JT Realmuto, don't spring for another catcher early on. It's not going to be worth it to you at all. Because those guys, yeah, it's important to have a catcher, but I think it's much more important to have a guy that produces. If you can get Realmuto like in the end of the first round, maybe in the second round, yeah, in a 12-team league, yeah, it satisfies that criteria. But always have a backup catcher because remember, catchers only play about 120 to 125 games, maybe 130 a year. So having a guy like James McCann or even a Buster Posey or Francisco Mejia may prove worthwhile at the end. And we look at the DHs, and I've told you a couple of times on the show, stay away from DHs. DHs are just a roadblock to success in fantasy league because they are going to hog a spot. You're not going to be able to use that spot for anybody else, and you're going to be stuck with a Nelson Cruz or JD Martinez who will put up great numbers, but you won't be able to fill that with anybody else. And that, to me, we've talked about this for the last half hour. It's all about positional flexibility. Okay, so next week we are going to go into our NCAA preview. Seth will be back. The week after, we're going to talk baseball preview. I hope you enjoyed this half hour. And for Seth Kamens, who's not here, I'm Sean Palmer, who is here, at it's over there, at SU Lawyer 2001. And we'll see you next week on the Seth and Sean Sports Radio Show. Thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great week. Be safe. Wear a mask. See ya.